My name is Morgan Whitfield. I am 34 years old, and my stepmother is currently holding a champagne flute aloft, preparing to deliver a toast centered entirely on my professional and personal failures in front of 50 of our closest relatives. She thinks I'm unemployed, a drifter who can't hold down a simple administrative job. She doesn't know she is speaking to a paramilitary operations officer for the Central Intelligence Agency. She doesn't know that the last desk job she imagines I failed at was a cover for a 9-month deployment in the Sahel, coordinating asset movements in a region where the sand itself seems to breathe violence. She doesn't know that my quietness is not the product of shame, but of a discipline forged in places where a single misplaced word could unravel a decade of work and cost lives. She knows only the story she wrote for me, and she is about to read it aloud. The memory that started it all is 16 years old, but it lives under my skin, a cool, smooth stone I can touch at any moment. I was 18. My father, a man who measured love in stock portfolios and square footage, had just married Janice. The wedding was an exercise in beige and quiet money, held at their country club. I stood by the grand piano, awkward in a dress my father had chosen, feeling like a ghost at my own family's restructuring. Janice had floated over to me, her smile as brittle as spun sugar. She'd appraised my decision to enlist in the Army right after graduation, a choice I'd made with the fierce, desperate clarity of someone needing an exit. "Robert tells me you've joined the service," she'd said, her voice a soft weapon. How rustic. I suppose it's a good phase for young women who find academics a bit challenging. You'll get it out of your system, and then we can find you a nice, sensible degree. Maybe something in hospitality. It wasn't the condescension that struck me. It was the finality. In her world, I was already a fixed point, a minor character with a predictable, slightly disappointing arc. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at a problem to be managed. My father, standing beside her, had simply nodded, his expression one of mild inconvenience. He was embarrassed not by her words, but by my choice that had prompted them. Something inside me didn't break. It simply set, like concrete. I could have argued. I could have listed my perfect grades, my athletic scholarships I'd turned down, my aptitude scores that had recruiters from every branch calling. I could have defended the honor of a uniform I hadn't even worn yet. But I saw, with the kind of piercing clarity only profound disappointment can provide, that it wouldn't matter. They were not listening for a response. They were waiting for me to finish being a problem so they could move on to the cocktail hour. So I said nothing. I gave her a small, empty smile. I excused myself. I walked out of the country club, the sound of polite laughter chasing me across the manicured lawn, and I did not look back. That was the moment I chose silence, not because I was weak, but because I finally understood that my life was a language they would never learn to speak. My world would have to be built elsewhere, in a place they could not see, touch, or, most importantly, judge. The years that followed were a silent montage. Basic training was a symphony of controlled violence and exhaustion. I learned to break down and reassemble a rifle in the dark, my fingers numb with cold. I learned to march until my bones ached, and then march further. I learned that pain was just a signal, not a stop sign. Janice would have called it brutish. I found a strange purity in it. There were no hidden meanings in a 10-mile run. There was no subtext in hitting a target 300 meters away. There was only cause and effect, action and consequence. From there, the path grew steeper and less visible. Ranger school, where my body was stripped down to sinew and will. The instructors screamed, but their noise was honest. It was designed to forge, not to diminish. I learned to lead, to operate on 2 hours of sleep for days on end, to trust the person next to me with my life, because we were all sharpened to the same fine point. Then came the quiet recruitment. The tests were not of the body, but of the mind and spirit. Hours in sterile rooms, answering questions that peeled back layers of my identity I didn't know I had. They were looking for something specific, the ability to exist in the gray, to hold contradictions, to be a ghost when needed and a hammer when not. They were looking for people who could keep secrets not just from the world, but from themselves. My silent years had been an unwitting audition. I was selected for the Special Activities Center. The farm was a different kind of education. I learned tradecraft, dead drops and surveillance, recruiting assets, and handling clandestine communications. I learned languages, not in a classroom, but through intense, immersive training, until the cadences of Farsi and Russian felt as natural as English. My life split into two distinct streams. One was a series of bland government-issue cover identities, a logistics consultant for the State Department, a data analyst for a DC think tank. The other was the truth, a reality lived in the shadows of failed states and contested borders. I remember one rotation, deep in a nameless desert. For 3 weeks, my small team and I had been tracking a high-value target. We lived on protein bars and recycled water, the sun a physical weight on our shoulders. The silence there was absolute, broken only by the wind and the crackle of comms. In that vast, empty space, the noise of my family's judgment felt impossibly distant, like a broadcast from another planet. They were worrying about Chad's real estate commissions, while I was trying to prevent a shipment of chemical weapons from crossing a border. The disconnect was so profound, it was almost funny. I earned medals I could never wear. I received commendations stored in a classified file under a number, not a name. My colleagues, the few people on Earth who knew my real life, were a family bound by shared risk and unspoken understanding. We communicated in glances and clipped, precise sentences. We knew each other's capabilities, fears, and breaking points without ever needing a long conversation. It was a deeper connection than any I'd ever shared with my own blood. I never tried to explain any of it to my father or Janice. On the rare, brief phone calls, I kept to the script. "How is work, Morgan?" Janice would ask, her tone dripping with manufactured concern. "It's fine." Quiet. "Are you still at that consulting firm?" "Yes." "Well, I do hope you're putting something away for retirement. Your brother Chad just closed on a lake house. You should see it." The conversations were always like that, a checklist of their success, a gentle, probing reminder of my perceived failure. I let them believe it. I let them think I was drifting, aimless, a government drone in a cubicle farm. It was easier. It was safer. Their ignorance was a wall I had built brick by brick, and it kept my two worlds from colliding. It was a necessary sacrifice. My silence was my strength, my fortress. The summons back to that world came in the form of a cream-colored, embossed invitation. My grandmother, Nana Eleanor, was turning 80. She was my father's mother, a relic from a different time. A woman whose love was as fierce and unconditional as Janice's was transactional. Nana was the only reason I would ever willingly step back onto that polished, hollow ground. The flight to California felt like a descent into a denser atmosphere. With every mile, the clarity of my operational life grew hazy, replaced by the tangled, thorny history of my family. I changed out of my practical travel clothes in the airport restroom, putting on the armor required for this particular battlefield. A simple, well-tailored navy blue dress, low heels, minimal makeup. The goal was to be forgettable. A blank slate onto which they could project whatever narrative they wished. Driving the rental car up the long, winding driveway to my father's house was a physical trial. The air grew thick with the scent of jasmine and cut grass, a smell I associated with suffocating politeness. The house itself was a monument to Janice's taste, a sprawling, sterile white Mediterranean villa that had erased all traces of the warmer, more chaotic home I remembered from before my mother passed. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. My breath was a shallow thing in my chest. This was, in its own way, an infiltration mission. The objectives were simple. Survive the afternoon. Wish Nana a happy birthday. Extract before taking significant emotional damage. The moment I stepped onto the flagstone patio, the battle began. 50 guests milled around, glasses of champagne in hand. The low hum of conversation was a familiar frequency of gossip and boasts. Janice spotted me instantly. She detached from a group of women and glided toward me, her smile a carefully maintained facade. "Morgan, darling, you made it. We were starting to wonder." The implication was clear. "As usual, you are unreliable." "Hello, Janice. The flight was delayed." A simple, factual statement. No apology. "Of course it was," she said, her eyes doing a quick, dismissive scan of my outfit. "Well, come, say hello to your grandmother. She's been asking for you." Nana was holding court in a large wicker chair by the pool, a vibrant splash of color in a sea of beige. When she saw me, her face, a beautiful roadmap of 80 years, broke into a genuine smile. Her hug was frail but fierce. "Morgana," she whispered, using her childhood nickname for me. "You look tired, child." She was the only one who ever saw past the placid surface. She didn't see failure or aimlessness. She saw the exhaustion that clung to me like a second skin. "Long week, Nana," I said, my voice softer than it had been with Janice. "Happy birthday." "It's happier now that you're here," she said, squeezing my hand. "Don't let them get to you. You're made of stronger stuff." For the next hour, I drifted. I was an island in the social archipelago of the party. I spoke to cousins who asked vague questions about my government job in Washington, D.C. I endured the patronizing pats on the back from uncles who measured success by the car you drove. And then came Chad, my stepbrother, a man whose personality was a curated collection of real estate cliches, cornered me by the bar. He was tanned, overly confident, and held his wine glass like he'd seen it done in a movie. "Morgs," he began, a nickname I despised. "Good to see you. Still doing that thing for Uncle Sam?" "Something like that," I replied, my gaze fixed on the bartender. "You know," he said, leaning in conspiratorially, "I could get you a real estate license in 6 weeks. Seriously, you're smart. You could be clearing 6 figures in a year if you just apply yourself. It's never too late to start a real career." He gestured around the opulent yard. "This is what it's all about. Tangible assets." My own assets were people, information, and a set of skills that could destabilize a small country. They were anything but tangible. The irony was a bitter taste on my tongue. "Thanks, Chad. I'll keep that in mind." My composure was a dam holding back a decade of frustration. I could feel the pressure building behind it with every condescending word, every pitying glance. I focused on my breathing, a technique I'd learned for enduring stress positions during training. Inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4. The party became a hostile environment. The chatter of the guests was white noise. The perfectly manicured lawn was a kill zone. Not because I was in physical danger, but because I was in danger of believing them. The constant, gentle erosion of their low expectations was a more insidious threat than any I had faced overseas. It was a poison that attacked the foundations of my identity. And then Janice gathered everyone. She tapped a silver spoon against her crystal flute, the high-pitched chime cutting through the air. The crowd quieted, turning toward her as she stood on the steps leading down to the lawn. My father stood beside her, beaming with pride. My stomach coiled into a tight, cold knot. I knew this was coming. It was the main event, "Thank you all for coming to celebrate our wonderful Eleanor," she began, her voice resonating with practiced warmth. 80 years is such a milestone, and it's a joy to have the whole family here to celebrate. She spoke for a few minutes about Nana, hitting all the expected notes. Then, her gaze shifted, sweeping the crowd before it landed on her own son. And, I have to say, seeing everyone together makes me so proud of the family Robert and I have built. I look at my son, Chad, who just made partner at his firm. He's a shining example of what hard work and ambition can achieve. We are so proud of you, honey. Chad preened, raising his glass. A polite ripple of applause went through the guests. I felt my spine stiffen. I knew what was next. Janice's eyes found me in the crowd. Her expression softened into one of theatrical pity. "And of course, we're proud of Morgan too," she said, her voice dropping into a register of gentle concern. "We are so proud that she's trying." A murmur went through the crowd. All eyes turned to me. The heat rose in my face, a traitorous blush. "It's hard, I know," Janice continued, shaking her head sadly. "Life doesn't always work out the way we plan. She couldn't even hold down a simple desk job, poor thing. The government let her go again, you know." She was fabricating details now, embellishing the narrative for dramatic effect. But she's here, she's home, and maybe, if she just follows Chad's wonderful example, she can finally find her footing and build a real life for herself. We all want that for you, darling. We really do. The dam broke, not with a roar, but with a silent, crystalline crack. The pressure vanished, replaced by a profound, Arctic cold. The humiliation was a physical presence, a cloak of shame she had tailored just for me and thrown over my shoulders in front of everyone I knew. I saw my father nodding in agreement, his face a mask of benevolent disappointment. I saw Chad's smug sympathy. I saw the pitying looks from my aunts and uncles. This was it, the culmination of 16 years of their story. I was the failed daughter, the cautionary tale. I held her gaze. My expression was perfectly neutral. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not defend myself. My silence had always been my shield. Now it felt like a confession. That was the moment the sound came. It was a low, unobtrusive crunch of tires on the gravel of the long driveway, a sound that did not belong with the tinkle of champagne glasses and polite chatter. It was a professional sound, heavy and deliberate. Heads turned. A black, unmarked Chevrolet Suburban had pulled up, stopping just short of the patio. It was the kind of vehicle that is designed not to be noticed, and therefore is noticed by everyone. It hummed with a quiet power, its tinted windows revealing nothing. The party's murmur faltered. My father looked annoyed at the interruption. Janice frowned, wondering which guest had committed such a social foul as to arrive in that vehicle. But I knew. A cold dread, mingled with a strange sense of inevitability, washed over me. My heart rate, which had been stubbornly calm through Janice's speech, began to climb. Not with fear, with resignation. The front and passenger doors opened in perfect sync. 2 men emerged. They were not dressed for a garden party. They wore plain, dark polo shirts and tactical pants. Earpieces were visible. They moved with an economy of motion that was unnervingly fluid. They were fit, focused, and scanned the crowd not with curiosity, but with a swift, methodical threat assessment that was second nature to me. Their eyes were flat and hard, and they ignored everyone else. Their gaze swept the patio and locked onto me. One of them, the taller of the two, began moving toward the steps, his partner flanking him. The crowd parted for them instinctively, a silent wave of confusion and apprehension. My father stepped forward. "Excuse me," he said, his voice full of the authority he used on his corporate board. "This is a private party. Can I help you?" The lead man did not even look at him. His eyes remained fixed on me. He stopped at the bottom of the steps, a respectful 10 feet away. The entire party was now silent, watching this bizarre tableau unfold. "Officer Whitfield?" he asked. His voice was calm, professional, and loud enough for everyone to hear. It was not a question. It was a confirmation. Something in the room shifted. The air itself seemed to change density. I saw Janice's smile flicker and die. I saw my father's brow furrow in complete confusion. I saw Chad's smug expression dissolve into a slack-jawed gape. I gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "Sir," I said. My voice was steady. "Ma'am," the man corrected himself smoothly, a subtle acknowledgement of rank that would be lost on everyone here but me. "I apologize for the intrusion. We have a situation. There's a priority, one tasking. You're being activated. Effective immediately." Behind him, his partner spoke quietly into his wrist. "Package is acquired. Ready for extraction." Package. That's what I was. "Location?" I asked, my mind already shifting gears, shedding the skin of Morgan the failed daughter and becoming the woman they needed me to be. The party, the house, the family. It was all fading into the background, losing color and sound. "Eastern Europe," the man said. "Wheels up in 90 minutes. There's a full brief on the flight." Eastern Europe. The words hung in the stunned silence of the California afternoon. It sounded so alien, so serious. It was a world away from real estate commissions and lake houses. I turned my head slowly, taking in the scene one last time. Every eye was on me. The faces were a mixture of shock, disbelief, and a dawning, horrified understanding. I looked at my father. He looked like a stranger, his face pale, his mouth slightly open. He was trying to reconcile the daughter he thought he knew with the woman being summoned by hard-eyed men in tactical gear. He was failing. I looked at Janice. Her carefully constructed mask of pity and control had shattered. Her face was white. Her hand, holding her champagne flute, was trembling. Then it happened. The crystal flute, the one she had used to toast my failure, slipped from her nerveless fingers. It did not make a loud crash. It made a small, sharp, crystalline pop as it hit the flagstone, a sound of something delicate and hollow breaking completely. No one moved. The sound of that breaking glass was the only punctuation in the thick, suffocating silence. That was the moment the story she had written for me was erased. The moment the truth, which I had guarded for 16 years, walked onto her perfectly manicured lawn and introduced itself. I turned back to the men. "Give me 2 minutes," I said. The lead agent nodded. "Standing by, ma'am." I walked through the frozen tableau of my family. I went first to my grandmother. I bent down and kissed her cheek. Her eyes were wide, but in them I saw not confusion, but a fierce, knowing pride. She had always known I was made of stronger stuff. She just didn't know the details. "I have to go, Nana," I whispered. She patted my hand. "Go give 'em hell, Morgana," she whispered back. Then I straightened up and faced my father and Janice. I looked at the shattered glass at her feet. I looked at her ashen face. I felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, just a vast, quiet emptiness. The anger I had held for so long had burned itself out, leaving only ash. "I didn't tell you," I said, my voice quiet but carrying in the stillness. "Not because I was ashamed, but because you never asked. You were too busy telling me who I was to ever bother finding out." Janice flinched as if struck. My father simply stared, lost. That was it. No grand speech, no final confrontation. Just the plain, unvarnished truth. It was all they deserved. I turned and walked down the steps. I did not run. I did not hurry. I walked with the same deliberate pace I used when walking toward a mission, toward the known and the unknown. As I reached the bottom step, the lead agent fell into place beside me. "Let's go," I said. We walked across the lawn, past the stunned guests, and got into the waiting Suburban. The door closed, with a solid, satisfying thud, sealing me inside, sealing them out. The world outside the tinted windows was silent. As the vehicle pulled away, I glanced back one last time. I saw them all standing there, small and bewildered figures on a perfect green lawn. My stepmother still staring at the shards of glass at her feet. They were characters in a play, and I had just walked off the stage. The SUV accelerated, leaving the house, the party, the entire life behind. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes, the familiar weight of my duty settling over me like a heavy blanket. The agent in the front seat handed back a tablet. On the screen was the first page of the mission brief, encrypted and urgent. For the first time in 16 years, I felt a sense of peace settle in my bones. The silence had not been a weakness. It was a crucible. It had forged me into the person I was. Their judgment, their expectations, their story for me, it was all noise. The truth had always been there, quiet and patient. It didn't need to be shouted. It just needed to be lived. The truth survived, and so did I.